Hello, everyone. Hi, Harley.
Hi.
Um, so I'm Lindsey Sharman. I am the curator of the Art Gallery of Alberta. I'm very happy to be joined with Harley Morman here as we're about to go on a tour of his new exhibition, Let's Do the Time Warp Again. And then we'll have a bit of a little conversation with him afterwards. Harley's exhibition is up right now at the Art Gallery of Alberta and will be up till the end of January. The AGA and I are situated on Treaty 6 territory. We are also in Edmonton, the traditional land of diverse Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Inuit, and Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and Anishinaabe. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people who make their homes on territories that intersect the current borders of Alberta. Treaty 6 is also where I first met Harley, where we were both studying at the University of Saskatchewan. Harley is now on Treaty 7. Harley is trans and has lived with multiple sclerosis for over a decade, while earning a BA in sociology from the University of Saskatchewan. He worked in communications with various queer and cultural nonprofits. In 2016, he received an MFA from the University of Lethbridge, where he is currently working towards a PhD in cultural, social, and political thought. And as of Monday, he is officially a PhD candidate. So huge congratulations on that. Harley Morman's visual work takes a playful approach to examining the social relations between art, artists, and institutions. And that's exactly what we'll do today. So we have a tour for you this evening. So you'll see Harley and I in the exhibition talking about the work. Then Harley and I will talk together a bit more about the show and the themes in the exhibition. So before we get into it, I'd like to thank EPCOR and the Canada Council for their support. Our online programming is brought to you because of the generous support of the EPCOR Heart and Soul Fund, and thank you also to Canada Council. Harley's exhibition is also in the RBC Gallery at the AGA and was sponsored by RBC. Thank you to them for their ongoing support of artists. So your way of interacting with Harley and I this evening is through the chat. We will take your questions at the end, but you don't need to wait that long to ask them. If you have any questions at all at any time, you can pop them in the chat at any time. So yeah, without further ado, here is our tour, and then Harley and I will be back for questions.
Right, I'm very excited to be in Harley Morman's exhibition, Let's Do the Time Warp Again, with Harley to be able to kind of show you around and allow everybody to see the really wonderful works that are in this exhibition and how they really all come together in this wonderful space. So the exhibition takes on a lot of pretty big themes. The exhibition is about time. It's about queerness. It's about being trans. It's about binaries. It's about breaking down binaries. It's about nostalgia. So there's really a lot of kind of big ideas sort of swirling around this exhibition. So just to start us out, Harley is going to talk to us about the first case that you see in the exhibition.
So this case is called Mirage, and Mirage is actually the name of the kind of optical illusion toy in the center that looks like a big black UFO. And it's something that I remember from my parents' house as being something that I was never allowed to touch because I think it was very expensive. But what it does, it's a pair of concave mirrors, and inside, if you place an object, it looks like it's floating on top of the surface. So I don't, depending on what angle you're shooting it from, it might look like there's a rainbow floating on there. So in this case, there are also a whole bunch of erasers and mirrors, and all the erasers are from my childhood eraser collection. I started amassing erasers when I was in probably grade 1. And most of the erasers that are in this show were actually given to me by my mom as bribes, basically, to do schoolwork and not complain about it, and to like do well on schoolwork, essentially. So we made a deal that whenever I got a 100% on an assignment, she would give me like a little sticker or a tiny sticker over every number. I would she gamified it, basically. And so all of these erasers are from like the mid to late 1980s. And I kept them. I'm a keeper.
Right, so from Mirage, I'd like to bring us to this scoreboard that's behind me here. One of the things that Harley a couple of times has mentioned in our conversations in putting together this exhibition is this sense of competitiveness. And so I think there's something interesting that maybe Harley's mom was sort of trying to capitalize on in the eraser bribes. And, he's described several times that, he has this kind of like internal competitiveness, and, not really for anything in particular, but perhaps with one's own achievement or success or things like that. And so I think that the scoreboard is super interesting. It's a very bizarre scoreboard. We're not quite sure what it's tracking. And so, Harley, maybe you could just share with us a little bit about this work.
So this work is called Scorekeeper, and really it was meant to, on purpose, be extremely ambiguous. So you notice in the reflection that's being shot right now, you can see me, and the text on the scoreboard is facing the right side. You can read it, and the clock looks relatively normal. Looking at it from the right direction, you'll notice that everything on the scoreboard, including the clock, is backwards. So the clock runs backwards, and the numbers on the scoreboard are lenticular, and will switch as you direct your vision toward one mirror or another. They kind of gradually shift between 0 and 1. And I liked the idea that it would be extremely ambiguous and kind of overtly decorative. So scoreboards usually keep track of sports, but there aren't very many sports or sporty things in this exhibition. In fact, I am really almost the world's most unsporty person, as I was in junior high. But I loved the idea of something very visible kind of looming over you as you moved through the gallery and looked at things. And as for what it's tracking, it could be tracking you competing against yourself or against some sort of imaginary other, or anything at all, or nothing.
So one of the things that I think is particularly interesting or clever in Harley's work and in this entire exhibition is that he's offering us several binaries, literal, like computer binary, zeros and ones, to completely absurd. And so he sets up these binaries just to kind of dissolve them and break them down or kind of highlight their ridiculousness. And so there's a lot in this show. Stickers and erasers are set up as a binary, young and old. And so one of the sort of main features and kind of the main works in this exhibition are this series of grade school portraits that Harley has made of more institutional school portraits that he had taken from grade 5 to grade 12 with some deviation. And then they are paired in lenticulars with contemporary portraits of himself. And so when you're walking around them, they are kind of blurring and blending back and forth between Harley now and his younger self. And so, Harley, did you want to maybe talk us through this work, what it means for you and what you're trying to convey here?
So, like Lindsey said, in all of these works, contemporary portraits of me taken last January by a photographer in Lethbridge, Angeline Simon, are juxtaposed against institutional portraits that were taken in school in all but 2 important cases. So going from grade 5 to grade 12, you can, number one, you can gradually see what I looked like getting older, and you can see me like through my awkward, like acne-filled teen years and into a slightly more confident, but still really awkward, like older teenager. And what I was thinking of, because all of the contemporary photos were taken at the same time, and they're layered in different ways on the photo, like with their paired photos. In some of them, I'm obviously, or in some of the photos, it looks as though I'm interacting in some way with my younger self, maybe standing side by side or looking at. In other photos, our faces are almost exactly paired, so it's difficult to tell which feature is coming from which portrait. And for example, in the grade 5 portrait, it really looks like there's a young girl with some sort of amazing beard, and I love it. And that, like, they change and different features become visible, but it's quite difficult in the ones where my face is overlaid to pick out exactly what is coming from which portrait. When I was doing this work, I was really thinking of, okay, well, it's kind of a thing for people when they're thinking about formally transitioning, to think a lot about like former incarnations or versions of themselves, even if they don't think about it in that terms, like thinking about their childhood. It's almost a cultural demand that we make of trans people to think about and like reconcile themselves with anything that might have been signs or trends, or that somehow like proves that they really are trans. That's clearly ridiculous, but I did it anyway. It's a bit of a stereotype, and I'm happy to fall into it. But as I went through my enormous archive of not only erasers and stickers, but paperwork from my childhood, and I looked at all these photos, and I thought, like, these photos all very much still look like me, and they feel kind of like me, although I look very different. And I noticed that a lot of the clothing that I was wearing would still be very much what I would pick now. My style really hasn't changed that much since grade 8. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's terrible. Anyway, so when I was pairing them, I tried to kind of match the younger institutional portraits in terms of color and general affect, like the kind of expression I was making, or the kind of thing that I remember feeling. So one of the works that I love to tell the story of, because it was kind of important in my thinking about this, is actually the story about grade 11. because grade 11 was one of the 2 years that I did not have a school portrait taken, but I do have a portrait that was taken on the day. In grade 11, I was kind of a surly kid, and I wore to school on purpose. I dressed up for portrait day, a blue t-shirt that said, "This is what a feminist looks like." And I put a rainbow button on my pants and a few other pieces of rainbow jewelry. And I dyed my hair purple with Kool-Aid. It was Diet Kool-Aid. That was not a good idea. And I thought, okay, I'm ready to have my picture taken. But when I got to school, the photographer did not think I looked presentable enough to have my picture taken. And so they declined and told me to come back later, but I wasn't able to. And so when I got home, I drove home and totally incensed and in a fit of like huffiness, made my mom take my portrait on the day, on picture day, sort of standing in front of my car, looking upset. And I kept it because it is in fact a record of what I looked like and felt like a lot in grade 11. And so when I recreated sort of recreated the shot, I'm standing on a track beside my tricycle, which is the modern equivalent of my car. So in grade 12, the portrait is also a little bit different. In grade 12, where I'm from in Minnesota, it's traditional for all high school seniors to have their portrait taken not at school, but to seek out an independent photographer and go for a photo shoot. And these are the photos that are used in the yearbook. So instead of like wearing a gown with the rose or any other local convention, everyone has these portraits that are intended to ideally reflect the personality of the person somehow. And I was really owly about having to do this photo shoot because I hated the way I looked, and I didn't like the idea of being shot in weird soft focus, the way so many portraits of other girls in my class were being done. But eventually I kind of negotiated something with my parents and the photographer that I felt reasonably good at. So here you see me twice kind of reclining on my arm. And in grade 12, it was fall, and I'm wearing a green sweater, and you can see I'm wearing a little rainbow necklace, kind of similarly to grade 11. Yeah. It was my tiny, basically invisible way of trying to assert myself.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting with the school portraits and this entire exhibition is that it's kind of this practice of knowing oneself. And there is a certain element of care for oneself at all ages throughout your life, sort of, looking back to high school and kind of giving care to those younger versions of yourself. But this idea of do we change, how we change, and kind of those sort of larger questions that I think are really interesting to think about when looking at this exhibition, and sort of how we change over time. And so time is definitely showing up a lot. And on this entire wall, there are all of these different clocks and mirrors. And so maybe you could just share with us a little bit about the clocks, your interest in time, and kind of what this wall is all about.
Okay. Well, in contrast to the school portraits, which are on the wall across from us, that are very much about simultaneously holding the past and present at the same time and trying to reconcile those two. The clocks on this wall, they're quite playful, and some of them don't really know what they're doing. So the clocks on this wall are all based more or less on stickers that I received like from school, so in elementary school. The stickers are mostly based on stickers that were either given as kind of reward stickers or stickers that were somehow institutional. So Super Student right here is from a set of stickers that was given out as part of the Scholastic Book Fair. So at the center of this wall, there is this large 4.5 foot in diameter clock with lenticulars at the points, the 12, the 3, the 6, and the 9. And all the lenticulars on this wall, they are based on stickers, but also their eyes. So they're the eyes of someone, and something is watching you. So all this work was made during the pandemic, and it was incredibly influential on everything in the show. So when I was thinking about time and thinking about how it felt like, not only was I going through kind of in a time of emotional kind of repeating and continually revisiting that you can kind of see in the portrait series that's on the opposite wall. But at the same time, it felt like I was really kind of stuck. For me, it definitely felt like, because there weren't the holidays or the different days that one can use to mark time, they just weren't happening. And I lived by myself. So it was like the passing of a day or an hour got muddled, and my sense of time started to become just influenced and different than it normally would be. And so in the show, clocks are doing a lot of kind of both conceptual and physical work. Everything on this wall is the end result of kind of playful experimentation with the materials I was working with. So with stickers and erasers, but also with the clock motors. And I loved the idea of using what is actually a quite simple motor and like on a domestic scale, kind of as a craft material. Because as you can see, all these works are clearly handmade. They are not, they weren't professionally made. They're not institutional. They're very provisional. They're kind of like glue gun together and made out of the stuff that one would or might have in their house already. And in that, it's fair to mention that lenticulars aren't generally a material that individuals work with. Lenticulars get used a lot for all kinds of things, but generally by institutions for things like children's toys, and a lot of novelties are produced with lenticular film, but they're not generally something that individuals would produce, because the tolerances are so small that in making them, it's just really difficult to get correct. So hence the working with those mistakes is part of working with the mistakes in alignment is a big part of the portrait series and also the series on this wall. So I was playing around with what I could do with lenticulars and what I could come up with. These works have been very process-based, and that's a different way of working for me. A lot of things about the show are both playful and just silly, and I think never change is one of them. I like the phrase never change because it reminds me of something that people actually did right in my yearbook when I was in grade 11 and 12. And it seems like the kind of extremely surfacey, surface level thing to say that seems supportive, but it's actually like kind of a curse, because who wouldn't want to change throughout their life? And I think I kind of get the sentiment behind it, but at the same time, it's both very good and very bad. So two things in the show are called never change. I use the phrase never change to refer it to the portraits series as a group. And clearly they change. They change all over. They can't stop. And also, this phrase looks like a lenticular, but doesn't actually change at all. It doesn't move. There's no dual image behind it, and it does not have the capacity to change.
So there are a lot of playful sort of elements and jokes and some things that are quite kind of whimsical in the show that Harley's put in. One of the things that I wanted to draw attention to was this little interventions that Harley has done throughout the show. There are these kind of little cutout mirrored bits throughout the show. But this one that kind of draws attention to the labels and sort of like points a finger to the kind of like infrastructure of exhibitions, I think is particularly clever and funny for me. And it's also mirrored. There are lots of mirrored elements. And so maybe Harley, just to kind of finish us off, will share a little bit about his use of mirrors.
So around the space, there are all sorts of small plexiglass mirrors. And I love mirrors for lots of reasons. They add sparkliness, and I love the way they kind of erratically can reflect light. But also, I like the idea that they're inviting you to look into them. And when you look at a mirror, you're seeing yourself and the things that are behind you. Like with Scorekeeper, you can see what's behind you. And I'm really using mirrors as a metaphor for the retrospective glance.
Hi, Harley.
Hello. I'm back again.
Yeah, it was so nice to be back in the show with you.
Yeah, that was really great. I love that we pre-filmed that.
Yeah.
I've been looking at the chat and I feel really excited about some of the things that are coming up in the chat too. So I really hope people ask questions and that we can get around to talking about some of the questions.
We need to talk about how you're Dorian Gray, possibly.
Oh my gosh. I hope chat like pops in on that one as well.
So I wanted to kind of start us off by maybe going back to the scoreboard piece called Scorekeeper. And yeah, maybe you could maybe expand a little bit on maybe what you think it's tracking or recording, or maybe you've decided in the meantime that it's not doing anything.
Right. I would rather not. Oh, yeah, I did consider, I thought at the time, like, I didn't know how much I wanted to say about it, but I want to say a lot. Yeah. For this audience, I think saying more is exactly what I should do. So in the exhibition, I think the scoreboard is really serving a bunch of purposes. Well, number one, it's the first thing. Yeah, there it is. It's the first thing that people see when they come into the gallery, because it's right across from the main doors. So they enter and immediately you can see everything from the front doors, but the scoreboard and the mirrors are right in front of you. And its general shape and the layout of it, with the clock in the center and the dark numbers on the bottom sides, are make it instantly recognizable as the type of object that it is. Like, even though the top is like, what is happening? Like, because it has a clock in the middle, I think it reads as a scoreboard, and it's high. And in that, its recognizableness as a category of object, it's kind of like a giant looming metaphor for the threat of and promise of social judgment and the need to compete. That kind of, when I think about my younger self, like, certainly one is subject to that, like, hyper surveillance from not only institutions, but also by each other and ourselves. It's just like the looking and the being looked at is coming from all directions. And like, when you're 13, you can just feel it so intensely.
Yeah, I think that idea, I was just thinking now, because the title of the work is Scorekeeper.
Yeah.
And so it kind of like anthropomorphizes this object a little bit. And so, yeah, when you're talking about this kind of like hyper surveillance, I think it's really interesting that you kind of have this thing sort of looming over you.
Yes, I know, but like, also it's kind of institutional. Like, digital scoreboards are typically really big and very expensive, like, fixtures in high schools, at least where I was from. I don't know if it's still the case, but you would have to like raise money for ages, and like, their purchase would be tied to usually, I don't know, some sort of major drink corporation. But this one is plainly homemade. There's kind of, it has some of the same plastic objects, sort of remnants, gendered remnants of plastic tools and curlers and beads and electrical components, and all sorts of little junky crap.
And so there's like this rainbow of objects above. That's what.
Yeah. So it's clearly been homemade by someone. But like, why? What kind of a person would make something like this? Yeah, and because it's a reverse and meant to be viewed essentially in a mirror, while your back is turned, I like the idea that it looks over your shoulder. So I feel like it's in a way both like charismatic, and it's the surface level of being very colorful and very friendly, but also it's a little bit paranoid and threatening at the same time. And I think that is kind of one of the dualisms that I may be playing with. I don't know how, because the exhibition is very colorful and friendly, and I want it to be that way. I want people to like the exhibition, but I want people who are looking a little bit deeper to really notice that something seems kind of off about it. Like, for example, what?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, even from the front, because of the symmetry of it, like in the words home and away and the typography that they use. It doesn't necessarily immediately read as being backwards, but when you look a little bit closer, you can tell that the clock is actually running backwards.
Yeah. Because when we were installing, we were talking a lot about Yawa.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a thing. Like, what team is that again?
So Stacy's saying, and I think it's kind of interesting related to the scoreboard that you're describing as kind of like hyper surveillance, and something that's like constantly watching you. And then thinking also about your school portraits, where you're kind of like, you mentioned that you always had these kind of like little, maybe hidden, but maybe not so hidden, like rainbows in what you're wearing. And so Stacy's saying, when you are terrified of being discovered and want nothing else but to be discovered.
Yeah, that is really good. And that's okay. I was actually technically, when I was wearing the little rainbows in grade 11 and grade 12, I was technically out. And if there are any younger people watching this video, they're going to say, like, you only came out in like grade 10. And I would be like, yeah, but we're talking 2000, like, okay, I guess that was 1994. And I was the only gay person that I knew at the time. So there weren't a lot of options for like role models or ways to think about it that were actually out. Like extreme like covert signaling was my option. Yeah.
So Amanda is asking, do you suppose most people assume home is their team?
Oh, that is really good. I think when I was making it, I did assume that home was the team of the viewer, but there's no reason that it necessarily should be. Oh, that's a really interesting question. I would love to hear what other people like would think about that. That isn't something I have thought about at all.
There you go. Something more to consider.
Yeah, well, that is really exciting to me when people bring up things that see things that I just haven't noticed, but seem, oh yeah, why didn't I actually notice that? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Right, so I wanted to ask a little bit more about binaries. So I did point out some of them, but there are, lots of them that run through the exhibition, like sporty and bookish, stickers and erasers, old and young, male, female, girl, man, accessible, academic, fun, serious. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about your maybe playfulness of binaries, because you're kind of constantly like creating them, I think, in your work, just to kind of make them absurd and knock them down.
Yeah, exactly. That is really true. I think I often invoke binaries just to kind of stand there as something that I can push over. But also the more we name, like when you read the list, like I think, gosh, they're just really silly. But what seems silly about binaries is the idea that something could only be either or, because clearly that is false. And I keep using the word clearly when I'm speaking. So that's that here. Okay. Anyway. What I mean is, I feel like binaries are just one of the ways that human thought tends to work. And I don't think they're necessarily negative. I think that some kinds of dichotomies can be really useful for opening up thought. but they're not useful and become really bad when they trap your thought, like in a pattern of either or. But I think when we're thinking about like related pairs of concepts, it can be really useful to think of things that are of a thing that is as far away as you can imagine from the other thing, that does seem like it's quote unquote opposite, because in thinking that far, it kind of stretches and creates a bit of like conceptual space in the middle, where like, yeah, it seems to open things up. And so I like playing in that weird middle space, and invoking both when I need to. Depends.
Yeah. Tyler also says in the chat, winning and losing as another binary, which I think is interesting. Maybe I'm just tabulating, I'm just scoring binaries here by adding them all up.
Well, that's a really interesting impulse. I love it. And I need a note here. Did you mention accessible and academic as one binary?
I did.
That is a really cheeky binary. But I don't know whether that necessarily is a binary, but in effect, it can be, in some ways, because I do talk about, when I talk about the exhibition, I talk about it being fun and overtly fun, and using its like fun and playfulness as a tool to like sneak in, like to Trojan horse in like other kind of harder concepts. But yeah, that's a binary that it would take a long time to unpack. But it is one that I would love to think more about. I just noticed in the chat.
More you wanted to say? Yeah.
Well, I just noticed in the chat, someone said Amanda said the weird middle space is the charm of lenticulars, and yes, that is exactly how I feel as well.
Yeah, it's that blending.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about nostalgia. So, I guess my kind of understanding of nostalgia and my kind of definition of it is this sort of fluid, kind of nuanced emotion, I suppose, that is both positive and negative. And, it's kind of like a complex sort of thing. And so one of the things that I thought of recently about your work is if you kind of think nostalgia is possibly like the anti-binary, or maybe you're kind of using this as a concept just because of its kind of fluidity, or maybe you could just expand on what your interest in nostalgia is and how you came to this as your methodology.
That's a great question. Okay, well, when I think about nostalgia, I think, one of the like original uses of nostalgia, and I'm sorry if there are any historians in the crowd and I'm getting this wrong, but I think the word first emerged like around World War I, and thinking about the very, very young, like teenage soldiers who were going off to war, and the doctors needed some sort of word to describe the intense yearning that was causing like resulting in like actual physical maladies and trauma aside from the war that was happening, that too, but the intense like yearning for home, and it was framed originally as an illness, as like a psychological problem, and it wasn't until more recently that it took on kind of any positive resonance, and I feel like it isn't inherently bad, but I think nostalgia is very much not about the past, but it's about the present. I think it's about needing to remember something because something is happening in the present that needs that needs help with thinking about it. Oh, I'm reading. Okay, I'm reading check. I'm not going to pay attention to chat right now. Yeah. Yeah. I don't necessarily think of nostalgia as being anti-binary, but I do think that the nostalgia that this show attempts to use as its kind of raw material and archive is very specific. It's really dependent on essentially the nostalgia that one would have if you grew up in like the 80s and early 90s, like in the Midwestern United States, in like a middle class family, as a white person. So that nostalgia and like the nostalgia that I have is not necessarily like universal, and I don't imagine it to be universal, but I imagine it as being very specific to the conditions I was living in. But I hope that in its specificity that it kind of opens up and people can imagine themselves into it because it's so specific. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I also think that just like the material, someone in the chat who said this, the material of lenticulars lends itself to exploring binaries, but also to nostalgia, because of how, as a material, it kind of has been, its use is really cyclical. And I think that it is like a nostalgic material because it had a heyday like in the 1980s, and then like it'll come back like every 15 or 20 years, and there's a dip and you won't see it as often, and then like people will remember, and usually it's positive memories of it, and so I feel like every decade or so it has a day.
Mm-hmm.
and then it references,
sorry, go ahead.
I just was going to say, and then it references, like the material itself references not only the content, but the materially all of its previous iterations, like leapfrogging.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I think maybe to talk a little bit more about materiality of the work. Most of your work, a lot of your work is made out of plastic and plastic materials. And I know this is something that you have considered quite a lot. I wonder if you wanted to just talk a little bit about maybe that kind of aspect of the work.
It is. I feel like a few years ago, I made kind of a conceptual commitment, or a rule, if you want to call it that, of a helpful boundary for my practice, that the work that I was going to make going forward was going to primarily use plastic as a material. And I know plastic is, okay, it's so many things. And I absolutely love plastic, not only for its like color and its malleability and the trashy stuff that it gets used for, but also like for conceptual reasons. I actually think my attitude towards plastic is that it is too beautiful and precious to be used for stuff that you don't take seriously. I think it definitely should be used as an art material, because it essentially, in some types of it, like essentially lasts forever because it doesn't go away and it doesn't break down. And it is, if you wanted to get really theoretical about it, what is plastic actually made of? Like things from the past, liquid dinosaurs, kind of. Like if you think about what petroleum actually is. Yeah, plastic it's around for forever, and in that way it is kind of like a fluid history. And lots of people have theorized plastic and like plasticity in general and transness together. But what it comes down to is I just love colorful little things. I just love it. I just find it extremely compelling, the things that I can do with plastic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I really appreciate your kind of reframing of plastic and its preciousness, and really kind of thinking of it as, of course, we've all been sold this idea that it's, disposable and one-time use only. And I think there's something really lovely about you kind of turning that and saying, no, actually, it's not. And that there is like a preciousness to it, and your kind of consideration of its lasting, let's say, forever, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah. No, it was actually, I was making portraits. A few years ago, I was making portraits out of perler beads, which are made of plastic. They are another children's toy. And I was just beginning to think about using plastic as a material and what it meant to make portraits out of plastic specifically. And it was something that got brought up by a student in a workshop that I did. Who was saying, she was really moved by the fact that the portrait of the person that she was making was probably going to last for ages, for forever, essentially. And I really loved the statement that it was making, that whatever portrait that I was making or whatever idea that I was embodying inside this plastic object, it was as if I was making a statement that this deserves to be around for a long time. Yeah, it is not going to go away.
Yeah,
it's not going to decompose. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm interested about the kind of influence of photography on memory. And I was wondering if maybe you could, talk a little bit about photography's influence on knowing the self, and maybe a little bit of the kind of your experience of looking at those photos and maybe, projecting sometimes onto them of what was going on, and kind of the maybe blending between what you remember from that time and what was kind of influenced by maybe your projection onto the photos.
That's a fantastic question also. Okay. Holy cow. Okay. Well, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'll just tell the truth. It was when I was kind of compulsively, I have in my basement a whole bunch of boxes of stuff. I already said in the video that I was a keeper. Well, that is really true. And I keep all sorts of things, including, well, I'm not a hoarder, but I have boxes of childhood paperwork. I've got probably 6 or 8 of them that I've been carrying around with me since I was 17 or 18 and moved out of my parents' house. It's notebooks and journals and general ephemera and old assignments that I did and that kind of thing. And I was pretty sure that eventually it would come in handy. This show, it's really kind of validating for that kind of behavior, but that's an aside. Anyway, I need to think about whether or not I still want to carry that around. But talking about memory, I found the photos again because I had I amassed them and I put them all in one place because they were in and amongst all of this other stuff. And I also found other photographs that I considered using. But when I had the idea really for quite a long time that I should actually use lenticulars to make portraits of like before and after. Whether or not I believed that I was at a state where I could be considered after, or if I even like that as an idea, that there will be an after. I'm kind of skeptical of that in general. I would hope that I continue to change as I grow older and become someone new and different, and amazing constantly. But going back to it, yeah, I know. They do really, even though in like school portraits, they're kind of the same. Like they're all relatively uniform and they're produced in a way to enable uniformity. Certainly, like there in my school yearbooks, there would be like a grid of tiny little thumbnails, and you would see everyone. But there was a lot visible in that tiny little grid. Yeah, you can get a lot from not very much information, or the information that still remains even when everything else becomes uniform. I don't know. I think that's all.
Okay.
I want to say about memory.
Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions that they want to put in the chat for us? Kim is talking about nostalgia. They're saying, I was thinking about this as its older association with homesickness. Homesickness has always been a word that has fascinated me because, well, it usually is taken to refer to a longing for a distant past home. I feel like it can also refer to being sick of home. However, one might want to interpret home.
That is really interesting. Oh, yeah, being sick of home. That seems like that seems like something that one could definitely think alongside transness. Yeah. Oh, was I sick of home? This is getting psychoanalytic. They always do. It's just, I think, a habit of the way I talk about my work. Yeah. Oh. I'm looking through chat and I'm trying to find exactly where the oh, there it is. I see the comment. Oh. Yeah, homesickness was actually, I think, the kind of thing that I was referring to. Yeah. Can one feel homesick for a gender? That is a really good question. Yeah, what does it mean to have? Yeah, and what does it mean to be nostalgic for something that you never experienced? That question of nostalgia for something that you don't actually have firsthand knowledge of is, I think, a larger question that my whole practice kind of engages with in a way. Certainly in the history of it, I have used nostalgia in quite a few ways over the years, and I am certainly guilty of secondhand nostalgia. I don't know if that is the word for it, or I have been. Yeah, I think that's where kind of projection comes in. So kind of like imagination of ourselves into someone else in another time.
Yeah, I guess as we're kind of wrapping up, was there anything else you wanted to add about the show or your practice in general, or if you have upcoming projects that you want us to check out?
Oh, I don't think. Oh, I don't think so. I don't think I need to say anything else. I love the conversation that has been happening, and I'm keeping up with it with half an eye, but only half an eye. I hope I'll be able to read it afterwards.
Yeah, we will definitely, we will share the chat with you afterwards, so you can take your time.
That is wonderful, because there's stuff happening in chat. Like, I see people making comments that I really wish I honestly, I took a few screenshots because it's important that I get all the ideas for talking.
But yeah, we'll definitely share that with you. And so thanks for spending this time with me, and thanks everybody else for spending this time with us. And be sure to come see the show.
Yeah, it's always so nice to talk to you, Lindsey, and chat with you. I feel like our conversations are always interesting and generative.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've really honestly loved putting this exhibition together, and
thank you.
It makes me sad that it's already up. We'll have to do more.
Yeah, it was such a good absolutely. It was such a good experience.
Yeah.
So
well, thank you all so much, and good night.
Thank you. Bye.